All right, it's a few minutes past 7, so I am going to get us started here. David and Gwen, can you just make sure that people get admitted? That would be great while I do our intro slides for everybody. So hello, everybody. I'm Kelly Bierman. I know some of you already. I see some familiar faces and some names. Good to see you. Hi. So I'm your host for this evening, and I am also the Conservation Director for Nineveh Foundation. And before I hand it over to our guest speakers, David and Gwen from Audubon, Vermont, I just want to do a short introduction for those folks who may be unfamiliar with Nineveh Foundation and the affiliated organization Farm and Wilderness, and to also go over a couple Zoom items. I know we're all familiar with Zoom at this point, but just want to let you know what we're thinking tonight. All right, so first, if you're not familiar with Nineveh Foundation, it is affiliated with, as I mentioned, Farm and Wilderness, two nonprofit organizations based here in Vermont. And for Nineveh Foundation, we have a mission dedicated to promoting wilderness and wildlife habitat, as well as providing opportunities for outdoor recreation and education. And as mentioned, the affiliated Farm and Wilderness is also a nonprofit summer camp organization, and we provide outdoor experiential education for youth ages 4 through 17 since 1939. And both organizations are linked in a shared mission dedicated to environmental stewardship and collectively managing over 4,500 acres of conserved forest land in Mount Holly and Plymouth, Vermont. So that's where we kind of are in this state. If you are unfamiliar with either organization, I will be putting the contact information and websites for both in the chat sometime after I am done doing the intro. So look for that. And I encourage you to go give it a look and let me know if you have questions. I am very available by email. And then I just want to give a brief moment to thank both Gwen and David for taking time to talk with us this evening about their experiences of equity and diversity, inclusion, and belonging at Audubon. And just to mention why I invited them to talk this evening. So both Nineveh Foundation and Farm and Wilderness share a mission, core values, and goals surrounding inclusivity and equity. And I put a quote up there on the slide, as you'll see, and it just kind of summarizes what our mission, our core values, and our goals really are for both organizations. To put it very simply, we just want to be a welcoming organization for everyone. And so that ties in nicely with our topic tonight. And I invited Gwen and David to speak tonight because I think it's really important that similar organizations like Nineveh and Audubon and Farm and Wilderness support each other and give each other opportunities to just have these conversations and talk about these topics, find out what the other organization is doing, and to also just be available and accessible to everyone like yourselves here in this talk, to just learn more about what we're doing and how you all can be supportive of these goals and the mission and values as well. So, when I saw the Audubon was doing, had these goals as well, I was like, it'd just be really great to have a conversation with them, see what they're doing, and how we can be supportive of them. So with that, I just want to go over some last minute things. I know at this point, we all are very familiar with Zoom, but every Zoom is different. And so I just wanted to go over a couple of those things. So if you all could just stay on mute for the entire duration of the talk, that would be really helpful. This isn't a webinar, this still is kind of a meeting. But I think we just want to give focus to David and Gwen for tonight, so they have the time to be able to share with us what their thoughts are. What we will be doing is pausing for to highlight questions or comments in the chat. So if you do have questions, you do have comments, go ahead and type those into the chat. And when we do pause, and I will admit it'll be brief so that we can be respectful of everyone's time, I will go into the chat, I'll select some questions out, and I will voice them for Gwen and David to consider or answer for everyone. So, and there's so many people here tonight, and that's so great. But thinking about that, we only have an hour. I'm gonna probably say that it's gonna be unlikely we're gonna get to everyone's questions and everyone's comments. So please be patient with that. And if we don't get to your question or comment, just know that we are going to be putting our contact information in the chat. Please use that. We want to be able to answer your questions, even if it's after the talk. So don't be offended if we don't select your question. I'm going to try to focus our Q&A times to be very specific to what Dave and Gwen are speaking about. I just want us all to be mindful of that. We only have an hour together today, and I am taking up more of that hour. So I'm going to stop there with the intro, and I am going to pass it over to either David or Gwen to get us started with the talk tonight, and to just say thanks everyone for being here. So let me end my stop sharing. We'll do some quick switch over and share. All right, you're good to go, Gwen.
Well, I'll start. Kelly, thank you so much for that great introduction, and thank you for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And I want to give a special shout out to all of you who are taking time out of your schedules for this conversation. It's a conversation that we all need to show up for, particularly those of us who are white and privileged, and have had the opportunities that have been denied for so many. Just being present is at least half of the battle. I also want to give a special call out to my parents who are on this call, who I wasn't expecting, and that's really fun to see you, Mom and Dad. Hey, I'll try to make you proud. So I'm David Mears. I'm the Executive Director of Audubon, Vermont. I've been in that job for about 2.5 years, and I'm privileged to work with a variety of really amazing folks. We've got a small team of about 10 people. We've got educators and scientists and policy folks. And our overall mission is to protect birds in the places birds need to thrive. Before I joined Audubon, I spent a period of time as a law professor at Vermont Law School, teaching environmental law. And I've done work. I was in Vermont state government. I've worked in Washington state government and Texas state government. And I've worked for the federal government for a period of time, which I think all adds up to that I can't hold a job. But I've also had the chance to work all over the country and work with lots of different organizations over the past several decades. And none of which makes me an expert on equity, diversity, and inclusion, but I definitely feel like we're at a point of inflection and a really critical moment to step up and begin to think about how we can, all of us can engage in this work, particularly those of us in the environmental community. So I think we haven't done sufficient work in this area. So anyway, more to come on all of that, but let me turn it over to Gwen, who has been a catalyst for this work within our organization, both at the state of Vermont level as well as at the National Audubon level. I should have mentioned Audubon Vermont is part of the National Audubon Society. So with that, let me hand it over to you, Gwen.
Thanks, David. Yes, so I have been with Audubon Vermont for 15 years now, and I started as a teacher naturalist here and then moved into also coordinating communications for Audubon Vermont. And I've really, equity, diversity, and inclusion is really my passion with Audubon Vermont. And so I'm just very honored to be here tonight having this conversation, and very heartened to see all of you here showing up to really grapple with how do we do this work. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're structuring this evening, because we really want to think about our own journeys and our own perspectives with this work. So, I think everybody comes to these issues with their own experiences and baggage and biases. And every day shows up in a different way. So we're going to speak to our own journeys, and we invite you to bring your own perspectives to this work as well. So we're going to describe and reflect upon some of the work as it's evolved over time at Audubon Vermont, looking at our accomplishments, what have been our challenges, our missteps. We're structuring it as a conversation between myself and David, and we're going to weave questions back and forth. And our intention is to really to model vulnerability and humility in this. and recognizing that this is not the start of our journey, nor is it the end. This is work that we're going to continue over our lifetime. And we just need to be very brave at doing that and step into it boldly. David?
Thanks, Gwen. Yeah, let me build on the humility piece of this a little bit more, because typically when you go to see a webinar or you sign up to watch a panel discussion, you're listening to a group of experts on the topic who can share with you a set of background and information and descriptions of actions you can take. Here's a bill you could vote for. Here are 10 steps you can make. Neither of us, well, I'll speak only for myself, I can confirm that I am not an expert on addressing equity, diversity, inclusion. I'm not an expert on how it feels to be subject to racism and the violence that is impacted on Black and brown bodies every day in this country in ways that are small and large. And so I don't want to pretend to be an expert. And that kind of raises the question then, so why be in this conversation? It goes back to my first point. I believe that we have, as those of us who are, at least for myself, is a white cisgendered male and an executive level position. I discovered a new way in which I'm privileged in that my brother and sister pointed out I'm the first child. It's incumbent on those of us that are in these positions to be able to create space for this conversation by showing up, by engaging in the discussion, and by modeling vulnerability and humility so that we can listen. And for those of you who have been othered, are in communities that have been marginalized for any reason, you, I think, don't need my permission for this, but I think all of us need to give you permission to step back and not have to lead on this work. Those of us who have benefited from the systemic racism and the structures that we have in place need to be part of leading this discussion. Leading is the wrong word. We need to be part of acting in this discussion and being transparent about our support. So I wanted to share that part of, as Gwen and I were thinking about how could we make this useful and helpful to the participants that have joined tonight. And we hope that there's a power in our descriptions of our work and our own reflections on what we're doing okay and what we're challenged by. And hopefully this will resonate with you. It may trigger your own ideas. And hopefully you'll be willing and able to share some of that back with us. As Gwen said, we are not beginning this journey, nor are we near the end. We're right in the middle of it. So with that, Gwen, if you pull up the slide, the quote from Audubon, our national organization, put this quote out, just as biodiversity strengthens natural systems, the diversity of human experience strengthens our conservation efforts for the benefit of nature and all human beings. And I do think that this quote captures one of my hopes for the conservation movement, that we have learned that taking a reductionist approach to environmental problem solving doesn't work. Just solving one problem at a time misses the larger picture, and we need to bring ecological thinking to environmental problems, recognizing the relationships between clean water and clean air and wildlife and healthy soils and healthy food systems. And in the same way, once you begin to think about the relationships between all these segments of environmental problems and you draw the circle bigger, outside of the nature-based systems include human beings, and bringing ecological thinking to this in that way also is a critical and vital part of figuring out how to solve environmental problems and to build durable solutions. So with that, let me turn to the first question for you, Gwen. So where did this work on equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging, start for you at Audubon?
I would say that this work started with education. And so I'm going to move to our next slide. It's through the education programs where this work really started for me. So here's a picture of a program that we have a partnership with the King Street Center. And I live in Burlington myself, and my daughter went through the Burlington schools. And so her classmates were kids in the King Street Center. And so this is very much a part of the community in my neighborhood. And so when we decided to come into a partnership with King Street, we really sat down with them and listened and really designed programming that was about the kids being in their own neighborhoods and recognizing that nature is all around them and helping them facilitate that connection with nature and get excited about it. We really moved into, following the curiosity of the kids that were there. And so then the next step from that was to really empower those kids to take action as well. And to really, nature and that connection with the environment is not something that you need to go out to Audubon to experience. You need to go far into the woods. So really, working with that sense of belonging in the community and where their place is in the community. So that was the first step. And then my work at the Winooski Newcomer Academy was another powerful place where we started that work. And that was, so this is the Newcomer Academy works with, these are middle school students. And they're people who are just learning English language skills. And so we work to develop programs that would really look at what are their stories of migration and relating that to the natural environment around them and then also engaging in activities to help take action in community. So that's the starting place, and it's definitely working with kids is pretty easy, right? So there's a lot of enthusiasm around nature, around birds, and it's really exciting and rewarding to do that kind of work. And so that's given us a lot of success and confidence in moving into these spaces. And then David, I'll ask you. So when you arrived at Audubon, how did you view the work that we were doing, and what did you bring?
Yeah, and before we go, maybe I'll answer the second question first, kind of like when I arrived, what was going on in my own journey. And I had, right before I came to Audubon, Vermont, I had been working as an administrator at Vermont Law School at a deanship, an associate deanship level position. And in that role, I was working pretty intensely with the law students. And it was at a time, that was like in 2015, 16, 17, into 18. As you think back, there was a whole series of horrific acts of violence against Black Americans. And it was also a time in which the Standing Rock protests were taking place against the Dakota Access Pipeline. There was a dramatic increase in anti-immigrant rhetoric at the national and federal level it's a matter of partisan politics. And there was the Me Too movement, in response to some of the bravery of women stepping forward to raise the issues of harassment and violence against women. All of that was churning. And at a law school like Vermont Law School, where the students are intentionally come with the goal of learning the law to figure out how to change it, how to use the law to make the world better, you can imagine the churn and the tensions and the work that the students were doing. And in the course of engaging with the students in that work, I had my eyes opened in some ways that I'm embarrassed to say hadn't been opened until that point. The students were so coherent and passionate across the board, and Vermont Law School had a really strong and active Black Law Students Association, a Latinx Law Student Association. It was just Indigenous People Law Student Association. They were engaged in some really important work and dialogue. There were issues of the Black students being subject to greater scrutiny by the local police. It led to a whole set of dialogues. We had a dialogue around flying the Black Lives Matter flag in a small rural town in Vermont. which raised issues with the community and within the student body. So I came to Audubon, Vermont, having been in this really amazing cauldron of conversation that lifted my awareness up in a way. And it was just an interesting moment to step into Audubon, Vermont, which its mission is, protecting birds, the place birds need to thrive. And I was really excited to find that the team at Audubon, Vermont is not what you might expect. As some have said, it was not my grandparents' Audubon. It was a group of people who were highly engaged in thinking about how do we engage with communities, as Gwen, the kinds of work that Gwen described, and some of the work we'll get to. So that's my kind of where I came from. And then one of the first things I interacted with was, or learned about, was Pride Hikes. It was a program that had just started when I arrived. And I think, Gwen, is that right? It started like in the summer before I had gotten there?
Our first hike was in June of 2018.
Yeah, and I arrived in September. So, and we had some commentary from some membership who were asking, why is there a special hike for an affinity group, for a group of people in the LGBTQ plus community? Like, why do that? And it was interesting. I at first didn't have a great answer. I thought, well, I don't see anything particularly wrong with it, but I didn't have a good answer for why it was important work. And in the conversations with Gwen and interacting with the community folks that participated, I got a whole new picture of one of the glaring blind spots for the conservation community is the fact that we have been unintentionally exclusive or unintentionally ignorant of the fact that not everybody feels comfortable going out in the woods. And if you are a Black person, or you're Latinx, or you're Asian or Asian American, or you are an LGBTQ plus community, you may not feel safe being out in the woods. And the Pride Hikes were a fantastic way to create a safe space for people to feel that they could go and feel like they belonged, and to get excited about this work. And that answered the question for me, like, this is absolutely the work of Audubon, Vermont, is so that everybody can feel safe while they're out birding. So I don't know, I've got, there's a few other stories. We had the team led me to engage with a consultant who's been providing some fantastic work. Some of you may know Elle Petkovaj. She's just fantastic.
She's here this evening.
Excellent, good to hear that. And there's another piece of this. Should I keep going, Gwen? I was going to talk a little bit about what's happened at the national level, but I feel like I'm blathering on.
Sure, if you wanted to speak a little bit about the national level, that'd be great. Yeah.
I'll just give a quick intro to this, and then maybe we'll get to it later. But there were a couple of things that have happened over the last year that have kind of lifted my learning and about the way that Audubon is engaged or can be engaged. One is, started reading some of the articles that were coming out about John James Audubon, who having taken a job with Audubon, I'm a little embarrassed to say I knew almost nothing about him other than he was a bird illustrator. And I've got some beautiful paintings, copies of paintings that he made on the wall of my office, thanks to my parents. And, he owned slaves, and he wrote about race in ways that were extraordinarily awful. He was clearly a racist man. And his life was also a little complicated in that there's at least some, serious questions about whether or not his mother was Black. So a fascinating person for a conservation group that now has declared our intention to become an anti-racist organization, to have Audubon as the person that we're named after. I don't know that suggests a particular answer that we should rename ourselves or not, but it does definitely suggest we should have some hard conversations about that history. So that's part of, one thread. Another thread has been, there's been some really significant negative press around the National Audubon Society at the national level, and related to equity, diversity, inclusion. And that's, I was lucky to get invited to be part of a group of amazing people at the National Audubon Society, a group of many beautiful colors and backgrounds and perspectives. And I stepped into that and had really humbling experience of realizing I knew the least about the set of issues of anybody in that room. And while I had positionally some of the highest levels of authority, I was in the least, able place to kind of contribute. So that was a humbling and challenging, and continues to be a wonderful learning experience for me. Anyway, I'll stop there, Gwen, and turn to our next question. So let's maybe talk about some of the work that we're most proud of. What, for you, Gwen, what are the things, as you look back the last few years, the things that you feel like we did that was good?
Absolutely. I would say without question, the Pride hikes are the thing I am very most proud of in my work at Audubon. It's the most powerful program that I've ever been a part of. And I just wanted to talk briefly about where that came from and how that emerged. So it actually, the kernel for starting it came from a place of extreme discomfort for me. And it came at a Nordic race. My daughter skied Nordic in high school, and one of her teammates was transitioning gender. And I was aware of this, and when you're in the race and you're cheering for the kids, and this teammate came around the corner, and I realized that I didn't know what pronouns they were currently using. And I was standing right next to their dad, and I didn't feel comfortable asking what pronouns they used. And in that moment, I was so uncomfortable that it made me realize that I needed to do better. I needed to educate myself. And the way that I did that was that I reached out to Outright Vermont, and I took their allyship training, which was incredible in terms of just really expanding my understanding of gender and gender non-binary, and what it means to for kids to. Outright Vermont works with youth and who are LGBTQIA, and so this training was very powerful for me. And so what I did was I brought that to Audubon Vermont. I brought Outright Vermont in to do a training of all of our staff, all of our camp staff, and to get us all on the same page and really thinking about the ways that we are unintentionally excluding or making people not feel as welcome as they could. And as part of that, the trainer was excellent. She was really challenging us to look at the systems that were in place, that maybe forms that people are filling out, and really commit to what are we going to do to change things. And one of the ideas I had was to think about how to be outdoors with the LGBTQIA community. And right at that time, there was conversations going on at the Pride Center about wanting to have programming in the outdoors. And so it was just a perfect synergy. And so our three organizations came together. So Outright Vermont, the Pride Center of Vermont, and Audubon. And we've been offering Pride hikes every month since June of 2018. And it's been an intentional safe space, and especially for people who are transgender, gender nonconforming. Just the kind of intimacy that happens on the trails and the conversations that can happen when you're out there. I really was not aware of the barriers to being in the outdoors, and just the power of showing up and holding that space and what that does to create community. So I would say that's far and away the most powerful program that I've been honored to participate in, and wanted to share a couple of pictures from the Pride hikes. Let's see here, sharing my screen. There we go. That's from our very first Pride hike, which is up Snake Mountain back in June. And this was our most recent in-person Pride hike, which happened in October. And we have been meeting virtually during COVID once things got shut down from doing public in-person programming. stop sharing my screen. And David, I'll turn the same question around to you. What would you say that is the work that you're most proud of in this arena?
Well, I probably the work I'm most proud of is listening to you. Not that that's work, but I do feel like that Gwen, you and the rest of the team at Audubon Vermont have had a tremendous number of really great ideas, and feel like part of my job has been just to really create space for you all to pursue programs and ideas that are meaningful. But with that said, one of the things I'm most proud of that I had a hand in was working with our team to create a youth leadership program. And one of the key elements of that was to provide for paid internships for our interns. We'd had interns kind of in an intermittent way, but thanks to a generous donation from a foundation, the Kennedy Foundation, we were able to provide paid internships. And that makes such a difference when you think about who can afford to participate in working over the course of a summer or a fall or spring semester. Just a simple thing as offering a minimum wage to do that work makes a difference in terms of who can apply and participate at a point when it's a really critical point in their early professional careers. We've had other aspects of that program that include creating campus chapters, working with universities and colleges across the state. We've had programs where we're working with the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps to advance good, healthy forest practices. And all of those work together are able to bring a much broader group of people and a much more diverse group of young people into this work. And as I think all of us have observed, young people are having a moment in the world in terms of their impact on the environment. And if there was ever a moment to broaden and support and grow the number of youth who can get engaged this work, and to include people that have been traditionally marginalized or left behind out of our educational system, this is that moment. So I'm really proud of that. And another one offshoot of that has been, we created a webinar series we've called Tough Conversations, and they're entirely a youth-led program. We ask the interns each semester to come up with a topic that's challenging and tough, and to find panelists that are all young people, and to give them space and a voice in talking about those issues. And one of the ones that we did is this Tough Conversations one that you can see the image for right now. The environment and the race one. And that was one that both in the lead up and the practicing and the preparation, and then in the actual webinar, it was really powerful. I'd encourage, if any of you haven't seen that and are interested in seeing what young people are saying, what young Black Americans and Brown Americans are saying about the importance of engaging in connecting race and the environment, it's a great one. It's raw and it's not polished, but it's good. And I'm proud of those young people, and I'm proud that we played a role in creating space for them. So let me, Gwen, I think maybe we should turn then to some core questions, frankly, that we've struggled with, and that our membership and board and others, and I think it's true across the country, have struggled to answer. Like, what is it? Why are we doing this work? I don't know if do you want me to kind of walk through some of these, or should we trade off back and forth? I'm looking at some notes that Gwen and I put together.
Yeah, if you wanted to, yeah, we can toss them back and forth. I think that'd be great. Yeah, so we've had people look at this and say, why are we doing this work? Why, this is all history, why not just look forward in the work that we're doing? And I think that it's really important that you cannot be in this moment without acknowledging the history of the conservation movement, the history of this country, and how we've gotten to this point, and the racism that is baked right into everything. And you can't move forward in a way that is inclusive and that creates a sense of belonging without recognizing what has happened in the past. Exactly.
I'll expand a little bit on that, Gwen. Right. Like, an example, one of the classes I used to teach was property law, and the history of land ownership in this country. First of all, that the current premise of how the whole foundation of our land ownership system is premised on a really racist idea that the indigenous peoples that lived here and used this land and were part of this land when the Europeans arrived, that somehow that they didn't count, that their interest in the land didn't count. The US Supreme Court issued a decision in which they said they don't get to own land. The king owns this land because the king put a flag on it. Like that's history you can't ignore. That's an injury, that's an insult that continues every day from now on and into the future until we find a way to have a conversation about how we seriously redress that. The history of, here, another example, like in Audubon, Vermont, we do a lot of work with landowners to help landowners manage their land, their forest land, their fields, their farms, to be more friendly to birds and to create bird habitat. And that's just, and we end up working primarily with people who are whiter and wealthier on balance, because they're the people who own land. And that's not an accident. There's a whole history around why Black Americans and Brown Americans haven't had the same access to land ownership. That's not history. That's a right now problem. So anyway, if we're going to really do this work, we can't just pretend to be neutral. We have to accept that the playing field is not level. Another question that's been asked,
and then you start from that point, especially when you're talking about land ownership. I think that's a really interesting point to raise, because that's something that we haven't examined historically in the work that we do. And so when we are more intentional about who owns the land, when we're more intentional about how do we bring more, make it more accessible for people to own land, and how to engage people who will, who don't own land in this kind of work. I think those are in questions of engagement and inclusion that really had not been considered before, and that we're grappling with now in a very different way.
Yeah, so a similar thing, kind of building on the, why not just, that's all history. It's somebody else did that. It's not my problem. Same way, this is somewhat specific to Vermont, but it applies to other states, particularly in Northern New England. But the statement of, oh, look, what are we going to do? It's a really white state. How do we do this work in a really white state? How do we be more inclusive, and how do we promote diversity? And it misses on a couple of levels. One is at a factual level. There are tens of thousands of people of many beautiful colors in this state who are extraordinarily talented and amazing, and we can tap into. So saying that we're white and therefore we kind of have an excuse for being an all-white organization isn't sufficient. Also, it misses another point, which is, why is Vermont so white? And as a friend and Senator Keisha Ram has pointed out in a recent article in VT Digger, Vermont has a retention problem. We have to create a space that welcomes and allows people of many beautiful colors to feel welcome in this state. That's part of our work. And saying that we're just white ignores and glosses over that. And then finally, one of the things that's been most frustrating and awful is to read the accounts over the last year of the ways in which people from out of state who come as tourists to enjoy the beauty of the state, to go skiing, to benefit in our waters and green mountains, who are discriminated against when they get here. If we want to be a state that's really wants to hold the mantle as a progressive state when it comes to social and racial justice, we got to do better. So, with that, Gwen, what about the kind of response to people saying, well, look, Vermont abolished slavery long before everyone else did. We were early on that bandwagon, and we were very progressive socially. Like, why isn't that enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's one piece of the history about what was going on is that slavery abolishment, but there was a lot going on in terms of how Black and brown people were treated that is we don't talk about, and that's true to this very day. And what we do need to do is to create a culture of inclusion. So, when people talk about doing work with equity, diversity, and inclusion, diversity is often the place where people want to jump right in and say, we should reflect what our community looks like. And which is not to say, I have a different perspective being in Burlington than being in the rest of the state, because it's not as white here as it is in the rest of the state. And diversity is really not the right place to start, because you need to be creating the culture and doing the internal work to really dismantle your assumptions around race, around all of the other areas that where you have bias, and to make sure that you are being actively inclusive. And thinking about like these kinds of questions, there's internal work we do, and then there's a lot of external work and pushback that we get. And it has been very powerful to, over the past few years, especially with David on board, with some other staff at Audubon, Vermont, and very much having a sense of shared values around this work that was really missing before. I felt like we were kind of on our own and trying things out, and it makes a big difference to have the whole organization behind you and supporting you, and just feeling like they've got your back when it comes to people questioning why you're doing this work, people questioning if it's a distraction. So it makes a big difference to have these conversations, to understand where people are coming from.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges and opportunities for those of us who are in positions of power, is to frankly cede power, to step back and create space for these conversations, and admit that we don't know it all. And I have to admit, as I've listened myself, replay in my head the conversation we've just been having, I feel like I've been a little preachy, which I come by honestly. My father's a minister. I don't mean to sound, these are my answers. They may not be your answers, but I share them from the perspective of, it's important to have answers, because these questions come as if you're an organization that's doing environmental work and you start talking about racial justice, people in your membership are going to want to know why. And it's a legitimate question. There's a limited amount of time and resources that all of us have to work on issues, and asking the question of why are you working on this and how does it benefit our mission, I think is legitimate. And these are the answers that I have and have come to me. And in that context, when asked, why is a bird conservation doing equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging? That's like political stuff. Why are you doing political stuff? Get back to, I like to read my newsletter from Audubon and hear about, that the cardinals have returned, and I've heard the first red-winged blackbird of the season. That's what I want to read about. I don't want to read about this other stuff. If I want to read that, I'll read, the newspaper or go on to television. So in response to that, I'll share a few thoughts, and Gwen, then maybe you can add some more. But if we really want to build a durable environmental movement, if we really want to transform the way we live on the landscape and the way that's necessary for our birds and our wildlife and our ecosystems to sustain themselves, and to live, in a world in which we as humans can continue to survive alongside with all the wildlife, including the birds, we need to build a durable political environmental movement. And that movement isn't one that's going to be based on just a small number of people who are wealthy and white and focused on bird watching. It needs to be a movement that invites everybody into bird watching and the love of birds. And it needs to invite everybody into enjoying the outdoors, and to see the special way in which Audubon has been able to present a lens, a way of looking at the world that's powerful and compelling enough that it will compel legislators on both sides, or in Vermont, on all three sides of our political divides, to make changes. So that's at its core what we're about. Another reason is increasingly, you know, this is something as an executive director of a nonprofit, if any of you are in this position, you'll appreciate this, that I wake up every morning thinking about how do I raise enough money to pay my staff and keep our work going. And increasingly, our donor community is engaged with this work and asking questions about it. And I need to be informed about, and I need my organization to be sophisticated in the way that we're tackling these issues if I'm going to be part of those conversations with the donor community. Gwen, you know, what about in terms of who we get to come work with us? How does working on equity, diversity, inclusion help us be a stronger organization in terms of our staff?
Well, it's interesting when you're thinking about the staff, and I think that when you're talking about the youth leadership program and our paid internships, I think, you know, that has been such a huge change. And also thinking about how we recruit and really, you know, when you think about interns, oftentimes it's about who you know. It's, you know, that's true for most jobs. And so really looking at the systems that we have in place around hiring and how we're getting the word out about positions that are open. How are we really going into the communities and really tapping into the partnerships that we have in this work and bringing in people who wouldn't traditionally consider a career in the environmental field. And so that's been a shift that you really, especially around education, you know, you want to see people who are reflective of your experience. So you want to really, and when we have staff that come in here, making sure that it's a place where people feel like they belong, where they can show up with their full selves and not have to hide any part of who they are when they show up to work at Audubon. I'm noticing, to be mindful of the time here, that we do want to set aside a bit of time for questions from folks. And so I wanted to take a moment and a little bit of space to open up the chat for anyone who has questions about the work we're doing, questions about the work you might be doing in your organization or yourself personally. So I just want to give a couple moments to that.
Thanks, Gwen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so folks, go ahead and put any questions you have in the chat. I will go in and pull them out for David and Gwen to look at. David, sorry, I cut you off there. Go ahead.
No, I'm glad you did. As people are writing down thoughts, one point, Gwen, that we talked about earlier that I wanted to flesh out, one of the questions we were going to ask each other is challenges. What's been challenging about this work? And I'll note that one of the challenges that I particularly struggled with is thinking about land acknowledgement, land ownership acknowledgement, and recognizing that the Abenaki people of Vermont really deserve to be recognized for the nature of their relationship to this land and the way that they've been displaced historically. And as I said, I see that as an ongoing insult. At the same time, it's a really difficult conversation to have and to think about. So I'm challenged by that. I was really pleased. I think I saw on the list of attendees here that Jeff Hulstrom, who's the chair of the Green Mountain Audubon Society, is on this call. And thanks to Jeff's leadership, he's engaged us in a conversation with the Abenaki representatives in Vermont about how we might do better. And I don't know what we're going to do yet and whether it will be enough, but I'm excited that we're started down that path.
Yes, and you know, when you talk about those challenges, I would say personally, you know, showing up in a space where I haven't been before, and reaching out and making new partnerships can be very uncomfortable, and so that has personally been a challenge. And you know, when I look to the partnership that we created with the Pride Center, just the radical acceptance that I experience when I show up, and you know, showing up also means, you know, showing up to events there. Like I before COVID times, I'm showing up for Women's Game Night at the Pride Center, every month, and to the potlucks. And so, creating partnerships isn't just about like, what are we going to do? Like, it's about, going out for coffee. It's about taking a walk. It's about really taking the time to understand what the community needs, what are the priorities of the community, and you do that through individual relationships. But that's scary work, just putting yourself out there. So that's definitely a challenge, especially during COVID.
Yes, yeah, for sure. We do have some questions in the chat box, so let me pull a couple of them up for either one of you to address. So Erin asked, you mentioned some of the training you did with staff. Do you have any training for your board or volunteers?
That's a great question. We really haven't done much training for our board or volunteers. And I think that's a great suggestion, something that we should explore. I know that my board, the advisory board for Audubon Vermont, has been talking about that and thinking about it. We just haven't, particularly in this time of the pandemic, haven't figured out the logistics of how to do that in a meaningful way. But I think it's a great suggestion. Gwen, am I wrong on that? Is there something
You're absolutely right. We have not done training for, and we don't have, I think that was from Erin, the Birds of Vermont Museum has a larger base of volunteers, but I think it's essentially important, especially for anyone who's facing the public, to be fully trained and to be on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have another question here from Kate. Are donors and funds the limiting factors to more work at the King Street Center and the Newcomers Academy in Winooski? Are there other sources of funding for this, or do you need to reach out for further support for these programs?
We could always use more support for this kind of work. And that's when David was talking about funders being interested in this. The other side of this work is really recognizing that this work does need specific funding. And, it's not gotten the funding it's deserved. And so it's really heartening to see the attention that's being paid to this work and to doing the work in a way that is really building sustainable partnerships, that it's not just a one-time do this flashy program, but is actually about the partnerships that are helping each other out.
Well, and also, wouldn't you say, Gwen, to recognize the specific challenges that marginalized communities often face extra challenges. So as we've been thinking about doing more work in Winooski and Burlington with youth and young adults and children who are in marginalized communities, we were thinking about how do we get transportation for them? And that requires more money. We don't have our own van, and I've been thinking about how to raise money for that. We need scholarship programs because a lot of the families that are underserved by our programs can't afford them. So we're in the process of putting together materials and recommendations to some of the business community in Chittenden County that have expressed an interest in being part of a solution to those particular problems. And anyway, but yes, as Gwen said, resources is an ongoing, consistent challenge. And anyone who works in the nonprofit sector knows that's just a constant challenge.
Yeah, and since we're on that subject, for those people on the call, if they did want to support you by making a donation or something, is it easy just to go on the Audubon Vermont website, and is there a place there they could make a donation online for you?
Yes, absolutely.
Right on the front of our webpage, there's a button to donate.
Okay, well, there you go. I just wanted to plug that since we're on the subject. Okay, there's a couple other questions here, and we do have a few more minutes. Will there be other affinity group activities coming up? So do you have any plugs for other group activities coming up?
Yes, so we had just before COVID hit, we had just launched a group called Women Who Bird. And so that is another affinity activity that we've been doing. Debbie Archer, who is our program manager, has been working with the unlikely riders around getting out on skis and in the outdoors with people of color. And so that's a new collaboration as well there. I'm just thinking about other programs that are in the works.
When
So I know Ray has been working with unlike riders for mountain biking, getting out.
Well, if I could just offer an anecdote too, a somewhat cautionary tale. Last spring, there was, at the national level, there was a kind of a Black Birders Week mobilization that was really powerful and wonderful to see across the country. And there was a lot of encouragement for us to lead a Black Birders Week and some Black Birders walking tours and so forth. And I chose not to pursue that, not because I didn't think it was a good idea, but because we haven't done the work, frankly, to build a relationship with the Black American community in Vermont at Audubon, Vermont. And I didn't want to just like advertise a day and have it be a performance and make it look like we were actually offering an inclusive program when we really hadn't done the work to build a relationship with people of color, to find out if that was something that they were interested in, that they wanted to lead themselves, that we could help with. So I just offer that as a caution that I think all of us in the conservation movement, all of those of us generally need to be careful about taking steps that are intended to make us feel good, like we're making progress. But in fact, it's just more, as they say, performative than it is real. And a related idea, caution that I've heard that I need to be reminded of frequently is nothing about us without us is a slogan that is good to remember. And we shouldn't be developing programs for people as though we're their parents or that we're in some kind of a higher level position to be able to determine what's good for other people who have different experiences than ours, as though, well, I won't go any further, but I keep that in mind. Nothing about us without us.
Yep.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Okay, so we have, I have a question here from Andy, and if we have one or two other ones, I think we're right around 8 o'clock, but let's see if this one will be our last one or not. Andy asked, is there any more research or information to better understand, the barriers or impediments to the greater participation of people of color in the enjoyment of outdoors? So David, you were mentioning there are some barriers, and the key pathway to environmental activism is to include everybody, right? And so I think he's wondering, are there other reasons? Is there lack of safety, other things? Like what other information have you found as an organization, and is there other places that people can go learn about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of resources that jump right off the top of my head that I'll mention. One is there's a great book by Drew Lanham about his experience as a Black birder. That is just full of stories and anecdotes from his own personal life that kind of illustrate that. Another is there was, at the National Audubon Society level, there was a Black Birders Week webinar. And the young people that put that on were phenomenal. It was such a highly educational experience. If I had the link, I would just pop it into chat right now. I don't.
I'll look for that while you're talking.
Thanks, Gwen. Anyway, that was just really powerful because it was right now. It wasn't like a historical experience, because there's certainly historical reasons why, if you're a Black American, you might feel a little bit ambivalent about the idea of being out of doors. There's a lot of violence that's happened against Black Americans that's associated with being out in the woods. But with that said, this webinar that Gwen just posted is really, I found really powerful. It was an hour and a half of really enjoyable conversation among a group of young Black Americans and birders about their passion. And for challenges like, that's my Audubon bird clock, sorry. The challenges of, if it's 5 a.m. in the morning, you're out birding in urban, Maryland, and you're wearing a hoodie because it's cold, and you've got binoculars, and you're walking through a neighborhood, be careful. If you're a Black man in that situation, you're putting yourself at great risk. And so I don't know that I would have thought of that. Not being in suburban Maryland where I used to live is not someplace I would think about being afraid to be out birding. But nonetheless, it's a real issue. So I think hearing from those voices was powerful for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those resources. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I didn't know, Gwen or David, if you wanted to put your contact information in case people do want to ask you additional questions or you know, send you an email. That would be, I think that would be helpful if you hadn't done that already. I did not see. Well, you know what? I think we'll wrap up because it is a little bit after 8, and I want to, you know, end us soon so everybody can get on with their evening. But I do want to say big thank you to Gwen and David for coming and just like having an open conversation and sharing a lot of different things about what it means to be inclusive, to be equitable as an organization that supports conservation and education and just getting people outside. There's a lot of things to think about, right? You know, anywhere from staffing to the programming you do, to the messaging you do, you know, and all the way through the organization. So it's really good to just take a moment and think about each one of those things, because it's not just about you know, putting a quote on social media, right? There's a lot of work and there's a lot of intention there. So I really appreciate both of your time to you know, just give a brief insight into what that has been like for Audubon Vermont, and to just share that with us tonight. So thanks again, Gwen and David, and thank the rest of you for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. And again, we'll get the recording out soon. I can't promise when. It'll be just a matter of how my skills are in editing video and getting it out on YouTube. So we're going to test that out in the next couple weeks. But I promise it will come to you in an email at some point. So Gwen or David, I didn't know if you had any last words, but if not, I'll wrap it up for us.
Thank you all so much
Yeah.
for your time. And thank you, Gwen, and thank you, Kelly. And thanks, Mom and Dad. See ya.
Yes. Good to meet you guys.
All right, everybody,
Thanks for
I'll
being
end
here.
the meeting. We'll be in touch and be see you outside. Everybody.
Bye-bye.